We always said that our goal in this development would be a striking gateway into the city. We said it would be unlike anything else, and it is. We started with what was a derelict, unknown part of the city, surrounded by infrastructure, with no one really ever having any expectation about it. And we turned it into this iconic community that delivered unique and spectacular homes for 1,500 people. River City is an urban development. It consists of about 1,000 units over 4 distinct buildings, many of them connected by such things as overhead bridges. The site is bisected by the Don Valley ramps. It's just surrounded on all sides by hard infrastructure. It's surrounded by parks that are developed by Waterfront Toronto, and it has green space that we ourselves have developed. River City 3 in particular was extremely complex in terms of design and the fact that every floor plate is different. It's a different genre, it's a different typology of building. The whole River City development is so unique because of its breadth and its size and also its architectural ambition. But I think it has totally opened up the city's eyes to what is possible in terms of residential development.
West Don Lands has a very long history. It's been an industrial site with tanneries and auto body shops and distilleries and extremely contaminated. It's also in the flood zone of the Don River. The land sat with nothing happening on it for over 20 years because no one could quite figure out how to remediate and flood protect it in a cost-effective way. So that was our job when we came on as Waterfront Toronto, was to figure out how to do that. And so the solution for the flood protection was to build a massive earthen berm across the site all the way down the banks of the Don River.
The Don River serves close to 1 million people when you think of its full watershed further north. And so the embankments on both sides are very vulnerable. When I look at a project like River City, I see how it fits into the kind of hydrology and engineering and embankment strategy for the entire Don River, which is one of the most important rivers that frame the city, because Toronto is a city on a Great Lake, and it's bounded by the 2 river systems, the Humber and then the Don. I think the site itself is so difficult and presents so many challenges on so many levels, from how to build on a site like that with the soil conditions. The geometry of the site was difficult, the proximity to the expressways and the proximity to the river. There's an amazing level of complexity at the urban scale, at the environmental scale. This was such a difficult site to develop.
The appeal of the River City site, to me at least, was the incredible challenge that it represented. Physically, the site is bisected by the access to the Don Valley ramps. It had the Gardiner that's surrounded by railways, and King Street is elevated compared to it. This is probably the hardest infrastructure of any site in the city of Toronto. We felt that we could really embrace that and respond to it in a positive way, as opposed to what most developers might do, which is either try to ignore it, downplay it, just pretend it's not there. The other interesting thing is that the land itself was totally outside the consciousness of Torontonians. No one knew where it was. And how were we going to get people excited about basically a site that was surrounded by transportation infrastructure? But I think we thought that we had a great opportunity to shine because it was such a difficult site. Urban Capital was a much different company back in 2007. We had done a couple of relatively small condominium buildings in Toronto. We had done a larger one in Ottawa, my hometown, and we had gone and done a project in Montreal, which was a lot of fun. River City, in a way, was our coming back to Toronto, hopefully to make a big splash after we had gone to these 2 other cities. And I think we had the attitude and the street cred and the sort of urban feel of who we were, that we would do well with this site.
So Waterfront Toronto runs a very rigorous request for proposals process, when we take government land out to the market, we have very high expectations. So we are trying to build complete communities that have amenities, schools, daycares, beautiful architecture is very important to us. Also sustainability, so we expect very high design standards in the buildings. We had a lot of submissions for the RFQ. I think there were probably about 18. We narrowed that down to 5, and we had 5 fairly good bids, but Urban Capital's bid sort of stood out among all of them. They were the clear winner because of their commitment to the design in particular. That was absolutely put them over the top, but also their commitment to the sustainability. They also had a commitment to creating communities and not just building one-off buildings. So we knew we could partner with them and have a very successful project together.
The only firm that I thought would really understand and whose architectural language was right for this was Saussure Perrot. They're not modernists, they're not historicists. This site calls for something that's unique, and so for me there was never a question.
We didn't do much condo building before, and this is exactly what David Wex was interested in. He was interested in the fact that we will bring something fresh, something new. He was proposing a new vision, and he in a way, he asked us for that new vision. So we had a very, very, very open playground to propose something different.
This was and still is our highest building ever for Saussure Perrot. So it was something that makes you dream, you know, when you have to imagine what you will create. You will mark the skyline, you will influence the skyline of Toronto when you create it, so you really think about it carefully.
The first time I saw the site, it was a flat wasteland, very much nothing there as an inspiration. So right at the beginning that we had to create a new environment. Not only buildings, but an environment, something that will connect to nature and propose a totally new vision of this area. This is not a static site. It's really active. It's kind of accepting its condition, which is living in the city and accepting what is living in the city. The fact that we have the highway going through, that it's at the end of something, is something important. What do you do? In most of city, people will build big wall on both sides because you don't want to see that, you don't want the noise of it. At the opposite of that, we took that as energy. This idea of objects turning around with the highway going through and finishing with a tower at the end. So this idea of transformation, that energy that project the building up in the air to become finally the phase 3.
The genius of the project is that somehow they managed to make a composition where you feel the bigger dynamic relationship. And I think that River City somehow has managed to relate to the speed and flow and intensity of the Richmond-Adelaide Expressway in a way that it doesn't just tame it, but it draws it into a conversation with the landscape itself. It's a very tricky thing to do.
We wanted to create a building that would have a very unique identity. This is a conversation we had constantly through the years, that how we would make something different from the usual market. I think we created something very interesting, and we used the walls of the boxes sticking in and out to create balance.
The idea of bringing kind of a new geology, an invented geology to the site, was to, in a way, anchor the project in something which already had a three-dimensionality. So the different phases represent the different phases of the transformation of matter, of material, or a rock. The tower represents the transformation of matter from black to white. For example, that very pure monolithic object which is transformed with the wind, becoming white with the erosion of the environment. Very pure, like a crystal, connected to the sky, projecting some balcony to create some kind of visual confusion, and then projecting into the landscape back to the city of Toronto. So the black representing the original rock, The white, it's purity when it's polished.
It's like a black and white urban film as a statement. Like today, if you make something in black and white, it stands out because everything else is colored. Theirs is much more exposition of urban relations because it's very cinematic. It's just exceptional composition.
The building sits in a way that will be seen different ways depend from where you approach it. That slight shift of angle of the tower itself to address the fact that, hey, downtown Toronto is in this direction, and obviously marketing-wise it's interesting to have these views downtown for many of those apartments. If you notice the organization of the buildings on site, you see how higher buildings or lower portion of the River City complex talks to the city, talks to downtown Toronto.
It really has a kind of multifaceted dimensions to its form, and it really creates a kind of striking landmark in the profile of the city, and I think that it makes a really positive contribution to the kind of overall arrival to the city itself.
The initial challenges with River City 3 were kind of twofold, really. One was to do with the flood protection landform, where we weren't allowed to build into it or put load onto it. So most residential developments would have a basement, and in your basement you would have mechanical rooms, electrical rooms, and a lot of parking. So in this project, those spaces were above ground. We're lucky to have bedrock that's 20 to 25 meters below, so a very good strata for bearing.
Essentially, you've got what is a 6-story parking garage ringed with residential units, and then popping out of that is a typical kind of slab residential building, and then popping out of that is a point tower. So you've got these kind of 3 typologies.
The second major challenge was how to make those residential boxes come in and out of the building and cantilever so far and so high up in the air. In the temporary condition, we installed caissons and temporary steel columns in order to prop up the 10-meter cantilevers of the walls and 8 stories high. We moved on to look at the load path. How could we basically cantilever out or create these, by use of steel reinforcing bars, tension hangers within the walls, and tie that back up to the top, and then use the full depth of those 8-story walls to strut back and use ties and zones of concentrated bars for columns within the walls.
It takes the exterior envelope and pushes and pulls and in and out, and it's never, no floor plate is the same. You might have a balcony condition that's over top of a terrace condition that's then over top of another unit that's recessed in.
On the residential upper walls, we had to figure out how to build them so far up in the air and so far above the podium. What we worked out was if we limited the maximum cantilever to 6 meters by using the formwork and the trusses, cantilevering out 1.5 meters at every level. If we use 4 sets of forms, we could get out the 6 meters without the need for multi-story high shoring.
Sustainability is one of the most important pillars for Waterfront Toronto. The entire West Don Lands was to be a LEED Gold neighborhood development. And so it was very important that our first building succeed at this so that we could achieve that throughout the entire community. And the designers really embraced the green space along the Don River, and they had that sort of green thread going all throughout the project.
I connect every project to the idea of nature. So this had quite an important impact on the way I'm working and the way I see the world. For me, what I was thinking of how to design those spaces, I was thinking of almost like the accumulation of moss on the rock. Seeing trees growing on one higher space and trees growing down. So the fact that we kind of spread the green space at different level, I think connect them all together.
Urban Capital really embraced the industrial nature of the site. The ramps go right between the north side of the project and the south side of the project. And that area underneath was dirty, garbage everywhere, would have felt very unsafe, and really divided the two sides of the site. And we took it to our designers and said, here's what Urban Capital's thinking about that space. And what they did was they created Underpass Park. They designed a beautiful space that now has skateboard park, hockey rinks, basketball nets. It has playscape for children. And on top of that, beautiful public art and murals. And it is such a well-used and engaging space. We wouldn't have thought about that if David hadn't actually brought it up as a way to connect his sites in this urban space and in this very sort of industrial area.
River City is able to organize all of its elements and all of its units and all the people who live on that site in a very, very interesting way to create a community. And that community then shares its urban habitat with the entire city, and that to me is the most sustainable idea of Toronto.
I think River City has clearly had an impact on development, architecture, design in the City of Toronto. I feel lucky to have had the opportunity to take what was effectively derelict, empty land at the edge of the city and turn it into this development that I think everyone agrees is beautiful and noteworthy and has delivered unique and spectacular homes for 1,500 people. And RC3 in particular has taken 4 distinct blocks and tied them together architecturally. I also feel a certain sense of satisfaction that it turned out the way it did. It started in 2007, it's now 2021, it's now completed. Obviously it's a collaboration of many, many people. We said it would be unlike anything else, and it is. You know, after 15 years, that's a real accomplishment for everyone.
I think River City 3 as a tower basically makes the argument that things can be different. You know, Toronto has a history of either making, I think, red brick towers with small windows or all glass buildings with endless balconies around. And River City answers the question of what else can you do? What else is worth expressing? And that is an imposition of vision over the subject. Because inside those buildings got everything that any other residential building in Toronto has. It's just completely reshaped, reconsidered, and expressed in an entirely different way. There's no other building in the city that's like it. It actually shows a very different way of thinking about, you know, residential development.
In terms of city building revitalization, it is a whole new realm, and you see other developers now following suit.
It has set a new standard for what a private developer can do to really contribute not only to building homes for people, which is really important, but also contributing to the public realm. And now it's actually not just an address, but it's literally a neighborhood, a place in our city.
We wanted to create something where there would be surprise everywhere in the building. It's a profile or a shape of a building that you don't see often.
It's not only an apartment and view. It's a real environment which was fully created from scratch.
You can no longer imagine the city without those buildings, and they therefore become part of the collective image of the entire city.
It proves that you can do something iconic in the residential market. It's amazing to be able to build a building of this geometry where, you know, things are coming in and out at such height.
It's kind of a beacon, you know, when you're driving down the Don Valley, you can see it straight ahead, and then if you take the Richmond ramp, you kind of whip right by it, and it really is a striking building.
I'm very proud that at the end we achieved this idea that a condo can be more than boxes with window, something that creates a real environment and has the potential to create life and to please people.
I think that it's a really healthy thing for Toronto. It makes such a big contribution. It shows that you can do things differently, and the way in which it was designed and executed, and now the way it's lived in, elevates architecture in Canada as a whole. And I think it will only inspire other architects, but most important, how they create urban habitats. And that's the future. And that's the biggest gift that River City gives to Toronto and the world.